The lesson I want to tell is my own experience. So I was this arrogant, impatient young surgeon, thinking that, I'm a godsend for mankind, right? Can cure all illness. Until I became afflicted, with prostate cancer, the area that I'm supposed to specialize in. So I had surgery 2017. Last December, I just finished my radiation therapy. So my wife joked that when you switch off the light, your backside glow in the dark. That was for recurrence. So scientifically, based on databases and whatever I tell my patients, if I'm sitting in front of myself, I will tell Cheng, I think you got a 50-50 chance. 50% chance that you may have a miracle, 50% chance that you probably die of the disease. So I wrote a book for the initial experience, but now I'm on to season 2. Miraculously, having a dreadful disease that has a very good chance of bringing early death is surprisingly liberating. I think I can more or less drop the attachment of the past, mistakes I have made, happy moments that I've had, I've been lucky all this while. I can drop the attachment to the future. I've been there, done that, whether it's sports, triathlon, Ironman, still doing it. I had more than my fair share of experiences that other people only dream about. I try my hand at management. I actually don't have real ambitions other than trying to help more people. So I'm learning how to coach, share my experience, learning how to do meditation in a mindful way to help people who are in distress and continue to live life to the fullest. Precisely because dying to oneself, knowing that I might be in that coffin one day, present moment, whether it's mindfulness or not, become very, very precious. And in a way, it's liberating. And maybe that's what life is. And maybe that's why there's no time to worry about what death may be. I also learned a lot from some of the good friends who are patients. And there's this Chinese tuition teacher. At the time I was already a surgeon, so I operated on him some years ago, but the disease progressed and it became quite clear that I think he wouldn't last very long. I remember very vividly one day he came into my clinic and, after some examination, I said, how are you coping? They said, I have no complaint. I can eat, I can pee, I can shit. I'm okay. I thought, wow, this is really contentment with very little, and he has got no angst. The guy's got it. On the other hand, another good friend of mine is in sports, knew him for many years since I was a youngster, ended up looking after him when, again, he has advanced disease. Unfortunately, he was full of anger. Despite a loving wife who really suffered a lot at home, as well as a daughter who's really mothering over him. I remember visiting him in the last days in Sengkang hospital, and he was still full of anger, abusing the helper who was trying to feed him. I went there, stood behind, and basically just observed and provide some moral support. I visited him every day, but couldn't really do much to help him cross that river to the other side, which is peaceful acceptance. Then there was another patient, a Cantonese, because from Hong Kong I could relate to him very well. He was under treatment, but it was also quite clear that, after some years he was not going to make it. So one day, the family, the son in particular, and then the two daughters brought him to my clinic in a wheelchair. And he loves to connect with nature, to walk to the reservoir, to admire the flowers and to be among nature. He asked me, can I still go to Macritchie? Because the children, out of overwhelming love, were trying to protect him and said, no, don't go out, it's hot, it's not comfortable. And I said, no lah, that's his one wish. Of course he must go out. And so they carried him, put him in a wheelchair, and then he went. Several weeks later, and when I came to the office, I found a very nice pot of orchids with a small note there. And the note was, my father, who has since passed, would love to have you, this orchid. So I was so moved, I took a picture of the orchid, and then it became my screensaver for many, many years. I have been very grateful to have all these inspiring patients who taught me a lot, and to do whatever I can, whatever little I could, to help people, cross to a peaceful death. I mean, after all of us, whether one way or the other, we have to die.
I think we should all realize that as we get older and older, I'm in the process of it. When I was young, I can run faster, I can stay overnight without any rest. And then when you get older, you feel tired more easily. Your eyesight is not as good, your hearing is not so good. So that's the beginning of your aging process. Okay? And then when you get sickness, you will start to lose other abilities that you used to have. Some ability to bath yourself, wash yourself. Sometimes you lost ability to go to toilet by yourself, how to feed yourself. I mean, all these are very essential part of your life, but you cannot do it by yourself and you need other people's help. Death is just the final stop, but the process is a process of losing control. And it's a process of asking people to getting more and more into your life to help you with what you cannot do by yourself. I mean, with the technology these days, it is really hard to die if your doctor do everything, try to prolong your... If the heart is not beating, we can make it beat. If the lung is not breathing, we can pump air into your lung. If you cannot eat, we can make a little hole and feed whatever nutrients we want to put in. If the urine doesn't come out, we can put a tube inside and let it out. I mean, there are so many things that we can do to just continue so-called life. But does that really doing a service to the patient, or are we just prolonging suffering? I think that is something that we should think about and balance in each and every patient.
I would say that not just amongst doctors, but death in general is not really a topic that most people would talk about. And although doctors deal with death and dying constantly, I think many doctors do, it's not something that we talk about frequently. Even though we encounter it, perhaps it's part and parcel of our jobs, and our primary aim is to heal and to cure and to try to prolong life as far as possible. So maybe in some ways, death may signal that, that it is a failure of the healing process. The next stage of my life where you're very exposed in the front lines and witnessing death and dying, and I think, and sometimes the suffering before the death and dying was obviously when I graduated as a medical doctor and became an houseman in one of the public hospitals, and therein we were always called upon to certify patients that had just passed on, or perhaps tend to the last few minutes of a patient's life. One particular death particularly struck a chord with me, and one that I would always remember. It was very early on, my first rotation, a surgical rotation. She was a young lady in her 30s who had advanced, I believe, was nose and throat cancer, and a very advanced disease. She was essentially quite in the terminal stages of her life, and she was admitted to the hospital for some complications of her illness. Next to her hospital bed was a picture of the youthful patient. I think on water skis, very athletic, tan, looked really fit and healthy. And here she was, without hair because of chemotherapy. Her husband was with her that morning, late morning, and she developed severe pain, abdominal pain, and was crying out. And I think from her voice, from her screams and cries, and from the look of her eyes, it was really the look and cries of someone who knew she was dying. It had that element, that indescribable kind of voice, and I think she knew that she was dying. And in that moment, she gave out a moan and a scream, and her husband and her embraced on the bed. And I noticed that she passed out, black stools which are probably filled with old blood. And in that moment, she was in agony. But yet, husband and wife really shared this very tender moment of intimacy, as a kind of a shared moment together. And I don't know why at that point in time I asked the husband to just step aside so that we could screen her and evaluate her. And she essentially passed on within a minute or two. So on looking back, I guess I was just wondering whether was that the right thing to do, to deny them that last moment together. And the moment, could she have actually given her last breath in the embrace of her husband, rather than going through that process of probably doing something that was very futile, not going to contribute to her living any longer or alleviating any symptoms, but more of a certification of her death. So was it that crucial? And I guess that struck me as to, in the moment of your death, actually what really matters. What does dying well mean? And what does the last few moments of your life, how can it actually be most meaningful to someone who is passing on?
I think having somebody close to you die is very powerful. I think for me, even though I've had other people die in the years since I began working in palliative care, it was when my partner of 20 years died. And even though I was able to understand and step back from the things that were evolving and things that were changing, I think it was obviously a very powerful experience, and an experience that I could reflect on and think, yeah, I am somebody who's got some sort of emotional ability to understand the situation, step back from being a doctor and being a partner, being a carer. And the power of that experience, it reaffirmed that maybe there was a sense of psychological well-being working with dying people, and the things that I was trying to see for our patients was really what I wanted to step back and see for my partner when it became inevitable that he was dying. The powerful messages for me is that if you can allow a person to be themselves, and you can manage the issues and problems that are surrounding them and allow them to feel safe, feel heard, feel understood, you're not shaming them, you're not blaming them, it really allows for, even at late stage in people's life, emotional stability, emotional growth. And it really showed me, and which was a big surprise to me, was just how intimate the last days of life were, or even the last weeks.
Well, death is quite common in the hospital setting, right? If I take it as a very scientific point of view, death is an outcome. In the ICU, the outcome is often mortality versus survival. But whereas for a person, death is a real thing, right? Being able to know that every single death occurring is a loss to someone, and this person that has passed is very dear to them. My opinion about death has definitely changed over the years. In the beginning of my profession, I'm trained as a pediatrician, then an intensivist. It's always about saving lives. Fresh out of the medical profession, I think we deal with a lot about, the science. We talk a lot about science and evidence of diagnosis, of treatment. But we seldom talk about or learn about how to deal with difficult conversations and coming to terms with end of life. So I think unconsciously we are not prepared for that, and we are not prepared for that difficult conversations. And when faced with that, sometimes we still try to rationalize with science and evidence. When we talk about end of life, it's a whole new conversation. Being able to deal with the emotions, which can sometimes be very challenging for a person who has not been exposed or has not been trained. If we don't see death as a failure, we see that giving comfort is a success, then that changes the whole mindset. Pediatric palliative care is an emerging profession, I think, in the field of pediatrics. Traditionally, pediatric palliative care have been understood for and quite well accepted for cancer patients. But increasingly, we are seeing the importance of palliative care for any children with life-limiting disease or life-threatening disease. If I were to say it from the point of children with chronic disease or critical illness, I think it should be integral part of the care delivery that we give to these children. It may not be all about death. I think it's all about support for the families and comfort for the families during the period of a very life-threatening disease. Walking the journey with the family and giving symptom relief for the child as the child goes through a chronic illness that is life-limiting. It may be prolonged, but that journey is tough. And I've seen dealing with kids with chronic disease and their families, they really go through a roller coaster ride. And I see them from the time they're in ICU to discharge to eventual demise. The journey is tough. I think the immediate part about accepting the diagnosis and what they want to do in the immediate setting, whether they want to take a child home with a debilitating illness, who may need a lot of medical care at home, and preparing for that itself, I think, is a huge endeavor. Sometimes parents have to quit their job to do that. Supporting them through that process, and at the same time, making sure that the child leads a life with the best quality of life possible, and also looking after the family and the caregiver, even the siblings in the family or other family members who may be affected. I think that's important. And then guiding through them as they go through the emotions, taking care of this child, and then nearing the demise period. And also the aspect of advanced care planning for these children is often a very difficult conversation. Sometimes advanced care plans have been made, and then at the time when the child turns sick, the parents may change their mind again. And then to be able to adapt, listen, and understand their needs, that's important. I think a palliative care team that is constantly in touch with the parents, that has the rapport with the parents, and have walked the entire journey with the parents, that will help the family through the process in a better manner than if they were to receive episodic care every time they come into the hospital.
So I've certainly been involved in many deaths that I would describe as good. The characteristics of those would be that the patient and family were involved and engaged in the decisions that were being made, that there was certainly exquisite attention to symptoms and the things that would be preventing people from living the life that they had left, and having people around them who are calm and able to sit and be with them, I think, are really important. Whether that can ever be an indicator, I'm not sure, but I think following up with families after a death and having an understanding of their experiences and using that feedback to keep improving is as good an indicator as any, I think.
I try to avoid ever using the term life-saving treatment. You see it in the papers, in the media all the time. And the reality, of course, is everybody dies. And all you can hope for with a new treatment is life extending, that your life would be longer now than it would otherwise have been. And we seem to think, the media especially, abetted by medical researchers and the health system, want to convey to the public that we are all immortal, and we're not. And so this idea that there's going to be this magic invention that if only the NHMRC gives me a little bit more money, everybody's going to live forever, is really doing us all a disservice. What has affected me a lot is this recognition that we, health policy people, the health system, the media, are conniving with this idea that death is an optional choice. And it's not. And we've got to actually make it easier for these death conversations to take place, make it easier for a GP, for example, to talk to someone when they're maybe about to go into a residential aged care facility, that, you know, you do realise that you may die in the next N years, and so, you know, give us some advice about how you want incidents to be handled and so on. And society as a whole doesn't make those conversations easy because a lot of people are death denying and death comes as a surprise to them. When, as I said, as you get older and you have more frequent hospital admissions, you should see that as a sign that, you know, your body is getting frailer and more systems are breaking down and eventually you are going to die. And so it behoves you to actually talk to your family about what your expectations are and how you'd like to die and so on. Now, we don't all get to die the way we'd like to die, but at least we can have those conversations and document those conversations.
I think palliative care in itself is truly a specialty. Like, you know, there are certain things that you have to take care of, the patient's comforts. It's not just pain. I think people talk about pain, but there are things which are uncomfortable, you know, what they can eat, difficulties with eating and moving around. What are the expectations? Which I think for a patient, expectation is actually very important. Right? Even our own loved ones, I mean, when my own father-in-law was unwell, I mean, honestly, everybody asked me, so what happens next? I'm like, you know, I really actually don't know. You know, especially for a particular disease process, we don't know, you see. But the palliative care people were actually very good. When they came, they could advise what to expect. And once you know what to expect, I think it is much easier, and also for the family is easier when you know what to expect and what might be coming. You don't feel so anxious and worried, and then you're like, every other day you're going, oh no, why is it like that? No, is this what's happening or whatever it is, you know. So I do think that is a really quite a major role for palliative care. It's just that I guess for young people who want to go into it, it's not one of those very glamorous, high-end specialties, and the conversations and the emotional burden, I guess, is high as well. So I think that's where it is for palliative care at this point in time. One of the things which I think patients get very worried about, like I talked about, this sense of abandonment from, let's say, their own primary physician, is that once I engage palliative care, it's a one-way street. Right? Everybody sort of says, oh, this patient's on PalMed, right? And then everybody withdraws. People won't, treat you like a patient. They will treat you like, okay, it's a palliative patient, end of life, and so you might not get the best care. It's meant to help you in that journey, to help the family and the patient understand what is in that part of the journey. But it's not a one-way street. I think that should be really made clear to patients. We are starting to teach some of these, what I call soft topics. In the past, it would barely, get into the curriculum. The soft topics around communication, ethics, respect, life, death. It's very difficult to teach value. You inculcate value. That comes from when you are much younger, right? When you know what your family thinks and how school has taught you in terms of value, how you value life in general. Social norms still have it that some people prefer not to talk about, death, and not to admit that, perhaps it is the end of the road and you still want everything from intensive care to everything else. But that sometimes is because you and your family have never talked about it. You have not had time to come to acceptance. It's like a surprise. Oh my goodness, he's really so sick, and then it's the first time that this topic is broached, you see. If there have been more conversations, I think it is actually easier. And similarly for the younger people, I think sometimes they don't feel that they are the ones who can start the conversation. So even in difficult conversations, I think we try and make sure we tell our younger doctors, anytime that you feel that it becomes a difficult conversation, maybe you should bring a more senior person in, right? And it's not because the more senior person is more clever, knows more facts. When I'm younger and I'm less sure of the boundaries or how far we can go on this, you're less likely to... I'm more likely to say, look, this is my opinion, we can do this, right? And be less able to listen to the other party. It's just a journey of maturing, I think. In fact, I would be more concerned if my young doctors are already, okay, so you think cannot, huh? Okay, cannot. I think I'll be a bit more concerned if it swings to the other extreme. Pushing the boundaries for success and for curative, I think is still a good thing, right? And talking about, the chances that it's not successful is just a necessary thing. And it comes with more conversations and more connections.
Doctors can never be strangers to death, right? They always see death, no matter which discipline they're in. Woody Allen, he said, I'm not afraid of death. I just don't want to be there when it happens. When I first heard it, I thought, that's really funny. That's and probably very true. But now that I think about it more carefully, I realize it's untrue, at least on two levels. I mean, if you're not there when you die, it could be because you have severe dementia and you're not aware anymore, or it could be in a coma. And these are two circumstances I would never wish on anybody. Then the other level at which it's probably wrong is that maybe it happens so suddenly that you're not even aware that they're coming, and you're very healthy and then suddenly you're gone. It might be a great death for the person who has died, because presumably there's shorter or less or no suffering. But it's terrible for the family that you leave behind. And so I think now, if you really ask me what a good death is, it's not just from natural causes or very fast. We can't choose the timing of when we die, right? But one thing we can all do is to choose to prepare ourselves and our family. And I think that's what is a good death, when everybody is prepared. You are prepared. It could be a terrible reason like cancer, or it could be one that's from OH and you're getting ready, or whatever the reason, you can always prepare yourself and you can prepare your family. So if I go back to my own personal family experience of my parents dying, both my parents have died. So my mother died when she was 71, and she died the day I turned 40 years of age. I was going to have a family celebration, and so I was getting ready for dinner, and then my sister called me at lunchtime. Mom has passed away. She was diagnosed to have lung cancer about 5 years before that. So we had 5 years to prepare for her death, right? Of course, cancer, there's always ups and downs. You think maybe you've recovered, but then it comes back. But when they're so long, after a while, you sort of you think, it's not going to happen. It will happen sometime later. So you never quite say the things you want to say to your relative or your friend. So when that sudden, that unexpected time of death, although it was expected death, happened, I was filled with regret. Why didn't I go for lunch instead of dinner? Why didn't I say the things I wanted to say? She was admitted the week before she died, and she was obviously very ill. And when I went to visit her, I didn't really say very much. So I felt terrible regret. And for my father, he died in October 2020 during COVID. My father had been having dementia for about 5 or 6 years before that, because it was quite severe dementia. So decided to admit him to a nursing home. So we visited him in nursing home regularly, but then the circuit breaker came and we weren't allowed to visit anymore. And when the circuit breaker was lifted and I visited, I was shocked because so cachectic, wasted, because he hadn't been eating well. And it's almost curled up in a fixed position in the bed. So I was really shocked. Then I remember, my sister calling me and saying, he's not very well, he's got a bit of a fever. So I went to see him, and I looked at him, I figured he's not going to last very long. So I actually spent, I think, about 2 hours sitting next to him. Obviously he didn't understand what I was talking about. He was also struggling to breathe and everything. But I just took his hand, which is something I almost never do, right? My parents are very Asian parents, so we don't touch each other. We hardly even speak to each other, right? So there was one time when I took his hand, I held him, and I just sort of thanked him for as long as I could, for the life he sort of given us. And so when I left, I went home to change, and then my sister called and said, he's gone. And there, I didn't feel regret. In a way, it was a terrible death. It was quite fast in coming, much faster than the 5 years that my mom took. But I felt better because I had said what I needed to say to him, although he didn't hear anything I say. And I was at peace there.